All right, so for this video, we're going to go over PMC's Extreme Gun. I have two models here. There's a newer version, and this is the original Extreme Gun. I'm going to start going through this, and then I'm going to go over the differences between the two models. So the first thing I'm going to do, breaking this down, is going to be removing our block right here. And so with your gun, you would have had this tool come with it. You'll remove this center set screw here, pretty straightforward. And we'll just go ahead and remove this and put this to the side for now. All right, and then the next thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be removing our screws. So you have one stamped with an A and the other stamped with an R. With your gun is also included is this tool. This is really handy to use for taking these off. We'll go ahead and get these removed and go over those. They are identical as far as they work, the workings of them. The only difference is just the letter stamped on it. So I'm going to go ahead and break that one loose. All right. So I'll put one there, and then I'll go through this one here. So on these components here, these are something that we will like to inspect every so often. There's a couple O-rings on here that can get frayed or damaged, that can cause what we call misting. If you experience that, we'll go through what to do with that. But essentially what that means is if you open up your gun valve here on when this is attached to the gun and your trigger's not being pulled and you have a little bit of material kind of seeping out of the front like a mist. A lot of times if you can identify if it's iso or resin, it's usually the O-ring here or the O-ring that's going to be on the injector here. And we'll get into that here in just a second. Or there's a scratch on that injector surface or a scratch on that mix chamber itself, and we'll go to that a little bit later as well. So to check that injector and that internal screen, or excuse me, O-ring, what we'll do is we'll remove the outer ring here. We'll get that removed first, which is this white ring here. There'll be an O-ring here. We'll get that out. That's this piece here. And then from there, you can slide off the gun screen here. So if this gets plugged up or has a buildup on it, remove it, clean with some acetone or a paint thinner. You can reinstall it back on the screen screw housing here. We'll set that to the side. And then to remove the actual injector here, there are these larger ports around the side here and a spring. If you can get a cleaning pick underneath that spring, and you can kind of pry up on it, you'll be able to remove that injector. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Be careful not to launch it off anywhere. And then here is your injector, and there is an O-ring on this piece as well. So again, if you have that misting, it could be the O-ring here, could be a scratch on that injector, or it could be this O-ring here. And then inside of the screen screw assembly here, finally you'll have your spring, and there's also another little O-ring here on the inside of that. So to reinstall, put the spring back in first. Make sure your O-ring is installed on the injector. Put a little bit of white lithium grease on that before you install that. Slide that back into place. And then from there, we'll put our screen back on. And then our O-ring. And then the O-ring, I like to slide all the way down, make it easier to put that backup ring on. And then we'll put that backup ring in place. And then after that's installed, you're good to reinstall it on the head of the gun. Now, like I was saying before, the R or resin side and the A or ISO side are identical aside from the lettering on the outside there. So I'm not going to go through this one specifically, but they are all the components are the same. You can use the same parts on either one. Now the next thing we're going to kind of go over is our pattern control tip here on the front. Again, this tool comes in really handy. It has a slot there to remove that. So we'll put it in place and we'll unscrew that. And this pattern control tip does kind of what it says. It does your pattern control. So on this particular one, it's a stamped 00. You can go up to an 03, which is a larger one, which means you will have a wider spray pattern. And the lower the number you go, all the way down to 000, you'll have a more narrower spray pattern. So this kind of depicts how wide your pattern of your spray is. There's also an O-ring on here. If you are getting a little bit of seeping out of the edges and not out of the tip, like here on the sides, it could be that this is just a little loose or that O-ring is starting to fail on you. Then go ahead and replace that, put some lithium grease on it, and you can reinstall that. It's also important to note that there are drill points on this. So at the end of every day, you want to drill that center hole with your drill bit, and these 4 little outer ones as well. There's also a third size of a drill bit to do these 4 here, which they connect to these smaller ones on the front. But these are at an angle, so you'll want to be careful with your drill bit, especially with the smaller drill bit going in at a proper angle instead of straight in. You can snap that drill bit pretty easily doing that. So you want to be careful while you're doing that. All right, and then the next thing I want to do is I want to remove our gun head here, which is just held on by these 2 screws here. Again, this tool will be used to remove those. We'll unscrew that. And then we'll set that to the side. Same with the second one. Now that we have that out, we can the head will just slide right off. Same thing with the mix chamber, will come right out as well. And this piece as well, if you have that misting happening, it could be that you have a scratch on the surface of this chamber causing material to get by it. So if there's a scratch here or those O-rings where that injector we talked about a moment ago, you could get that misting effect. And you can refinish this with some like 600 grit paper, repolish it back out, and it should be good to go. The next thing I want to talk about is going to be the pneumatic side of this gun. So to remove this back piece, you'll actually use this tool yet again. We'll have this end will just go right on and you can break that loose. Once it's loose, you should be able to do it by hand. We'll take this piece off. This is your safety, so you can lock the trigger with this. It's a pretty nice feature that this gun has for safety. There's also an O-ring on that as well. And then here on the front, we have an O-ring, which I'll go ahead and remove that with my cleaning pick here. There's an O-ring there on that inside that has against the gun head and the rest of it there. And then there's also another like bushing here as well, which we'll get that out here in a moment. So there's an air piston in here. To remove it, what you can do is you need to be careful not to score it. So I actually like using a round end object, which is good with this tool here. So I actually will place it in there, like where that chamber would go. You can kind of push down on it, and that usually will break it loose. And then once you have that out, it's going to look like this. So there's 2 O-rings on here. You have the larger one and then the more small one here on the inside. Again, before reinstalling it, you'll want to inspect it, make sure that there's no tears on it and there's no broken pieces. So you'll want to make sure you lubricate that with white lithium grease on the reinstall as well. And then there's that bushing in here, which I'll go ahead and pull that out with my cleaning pick here. It's this piece here. You have a little bushing there. And then the next thing I want to remove will be these 2 screws here on top. You'll be using this tool again for that. We'll go ahead and get those out. All right, and then we'll have a couple O-rings on here. I'll go over here in just a second. There's also a check ball in here with this little set screw here. You'll go ahead and, if you were to remove that, there'll be just a spring, the check ball, and that is just for the pneumatic side there. It's pretty rare you actually have to do anything with this, but on a rebuild, I would recommend taking all that out, making sure all that was cleaned out. But it just unscrews, and then there's just a spring goes in first, and then a check ball, and then that housing for it. And then next we have these 3 O-rings here. Those are also with the pneumatic side of the gun, so rarely will they need to be really looked at. But there's 3 of them that stack like that. And then when you reinstall this, you basically they have like little indentations where those O-rings go, and you'll just place this on top, and then you'll slide these back into place without trying to move it too much. And then I like to start one, and then I'll go ahead and start the other one as well, so you don't just cinch it down all the way down on one side or the other. Kind of get them kind of both started, and then kind of rotate to the other one, and once you get them on there pretty good, you can just tighten them back up. And these only need to be hand tight with this tool. There's no need to get like a wrench or anything like that for this. And then I'm gonna go ahead and reinstall our piston here. I like to install it with the opening facing up. Makes it a lot easier to get that mixing chamber installed. Basically, you'll just push it in all the way. It'll look something like that. You'll go ahead and put that bushing back in. And then you can go ahead and screw in the lock back in the back, the safety. Then I get that about hand tight there, and then I'll cinch it down with this just to make sure that we don't have any air getting by. And then the next thing I want to do is install this O-ring there on the front. Now that that's installed, I'll go ahead and get my mix chamber put back in. And on this, it only can really go in one way, but I just typically do it with the numbers facing up. You can go ahead and do that, and then you'll put the gun head back on that. It'll just slide right on. It's nice you have those two pegs to kind of guide it on. You'll put your two set screws back in place. And then once we have those started, I'll go to the other one, get that one until it starts to grab, and then I'll finally make it nice and hand tight. And then the other thing I was going to note is the check balls here on the inlet. These are pretty easy to get to. But I'm not going to take it out, but if you had like a screwdriver, you actually slide it in this groove and you can pry it up, and there'll be a spring, a check ball, and then this plastic piece here. That's kind of all it is. So if it's going to be one you're going to replace, you can actually just go in where the check ball is, and you can kind of just pry up on it and pop it out that way. I'll go ahead and take this one out just so we can look at it. And then once you kind of get it started, you can slide that screwdriver, push it into that groove, and kind of pry up on it. Then once you kind of get it moving, you can kind of remove it that way. So you'll have that check valve seat, you'll have your check ball, and then there's also a spring in here. So it's pretty easy assembly to take out and to reinstall. So the first component will be the spring, and then we'll get our check ball in place, and then the actual seat just kind of snaps into place there on top, just like so. And that's all there is really to that. So if you have leaking from your block when it's installed and the valve is open, it could be if there's a nick or a scratch on the actual seat here, and then just pop these out, replace it with a new smooth surfaced one, and you should be good to go with that. And both these components on either side are identical. Same check ball, same spring, same seat on either side. So either components work on either side for this gun as well. And now that we have that put back together, I'm going to go ahead and put the air cap back on, or the powder control tip back on. Again, I'm going to get it kind of hand tight, and then I'm going to grab this tool to kind of make sure it's not going to leak. And then we want to pay attention to the letter stamped on these. This one says A, so I'm going to make sure I have it on the side that has the A on it. You don't want to cross this over, especially taking this apart. You want to make sure that they stay on the correlating sides. And I'll get this part going. And then to tighten these up, what we'll do is we'll get their tool back out. Get that nice and tight. Same with the other side. We don't want it to leak. All right. And then finally we'll install our block back on. And that's about how it goes there. And so that was a good overview of the Xtreme gun. I'm going to go over the new model, kind of go over the differences between the two, and kind of show you what those things are. So I'll set this one off to the side for now. and then we'll go into the new upgraded version of that Xtreme gun. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove that block just like before. So we'll go ahead and unscrew this. These components are going to be identical. There's no real differences between the two of those. So I'm just going to get this to the side. Now, first thing we're going to notice is that these are different. These check balls are different here. So I'll go ahead and remove one of those. And again, they are identical on both sides. We'll slide this piece out. So as you can see, this one has an O-ring here on this face here, and that actually mates with the block. So obviously if you have some leaking or something out of there, it could be this O-ring or it could be this O-ring here as well, the one here on the side. Then on this side we have a snap ring, a spring retainer, a spring, and a check ball. In your gun box, it was actually included a pair of snap ring pliers. So we're going to use those to remove this. So I'm going to get this in place, and we'll go ahead and remove that. And then we have our spring retainer, which will be coming out next, along with our spring here, and then finally our check ball. And then on the reinstall, it'll start with the check ball, then the spring, then it'll be the spring retainer, followed by that snap ring. So we'll get this back into place, and then we'll push the snap ring down where it needs to go. And then once we get it removed, we'll make sure that it's in there properly, down in that little groove on all sides. Then once we confirm that it is, we'll make sure that we get some white lithium grease on these O-rings, and then we'll reinstall it in our gun. Basically just slide it back in, and now sometimes there's going to be a little bit of pressure behind there because the air is kind of trapped. You can actually push in that check ball just a little bit to relieve that pressure, and it'll slide all the way in. Both of them are identical, so they'll be the same thing. They'll have the two O-rings, check ball, spring, retainer, and the snap ring. So that's different on this version of this Xtreme gun. The screen screws are all the same. All the O-rings and screens and all that are exactly the same in the side of the screen screws. The other obviously thing that's different is going to be the handle. You have the strap, and you have these guards up here on top to kind of keep your hand from rubbing on the line whenever the block and lines are on there. It kind of keeps your hand from riding up, and that's nice. The other difference is going to be the air piston inside. It's actually going to be in two pieces, and so it makes it a little easier if you were needing to replace a portion of it. You wouldn't have to replace the whole piston. It'll be in two separate pieces, so that's also nice. But those are really the only main differences between these two guns. They have the same mix chambers, same powder control tips, same portion here is going to be the same. The only difference is the handle's different. The head's going to be slightly different to accommodate these different check balls here. But other than that, it's all going to be essentially the same gun. So it's not a whole lot has changed, but there are a few differences between the two models here. But other than that, I think with that in mind, you should be able to take this apart and understand how it works and get it back together.